This is a brief overview of some of the histology that we examine in the respiratory system. So first, if we just look at a cross-section of a lung, one of the things that you need to be able to do is differentiate between a bronchus and a bronchiole. So the bronchi have cartilage support as well as smooth muscle. So you can see here are little plates of cartilage, whereas a bronchiole does not have that. Another thing that you guys have to remember is it's not just the bronchi and the bronchioles and the alveoli, which is all of this here. These are all alveoli that are in the lungs. You also have arteries and veins, and so a kind of common mistake that I saw on some of the drawings on your worksheets where people were labeling the artery as a bronchiole or a bronchus. So you have to remember, if you see these kind of bands of thick, smooth muscle, it's probably going to be an artery. Let's go back to that for a second. I wasn't quite done with that. It's probably going to be an artery. So if we look at our kind of bronchi or bronchus in singular format in more detail, we've got our lumen, that's inside, that's where the air is. We have the pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium in the mucosa with a little bit of kind of lamina propria connective tissue underneath that. And then we get our little band of smooth muscle. So here's smooth muscle. And then we have these little plates of cartilage. So this is a little plate of cartilage. Here's another little plate of cartilage. Here is more cartilage here. And so if you see these cartilage plates, what you're looking at is a bronchus, not a bronchiole. And these here, of course, are alveoli. Just a single layer of squamous epithelia. If we look at our bronchiole, we still have columnar epithelium, but in some of the smaller bronchioles, it tends to transition from the pseudostratified columnar more towards being simple columnar epithelium. And you can see outside that is our smooth muscle layer, but no cartilage plates. So if we lack cartilage plates, we're looking at a bronchiole and not a bronchus. So bronchi, ciliated, pseudostratified columnar epithelium, smooth muscle, hyaline cartilage plates. Bronchioles, the larger bronchioles still have the ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium, but the smaller bronchioles tend to have simple columnar epithelium, smooth muscle, and no hyaline cartilage plates. And the alveoli are just a simple squamous layer of epithelia. So that way oxygen and carbon dioxide can diffuse across that single layer of cells very easily. One of the other tissue slides that y'all looked at was a cross-section through the esophagus and the trachea. So here is the trachea, which is part of the respiratory system. Here is the esophagus, which is part of our digestive system. So they both have epithelium. It's pseudostratified columnar epithelium in the trachea and stratified squamous in the esophagus. You can then also see the submucosa and the muscularis externa of the esophagus versus kind of the just very simple submucosa of the trachea with the C-shaped cartilage rings. Oops, excuse me, go back. Around the trachea. So the trachea has that C-shaped cartilage ring that helps the trachea stay open so air can always move down the trachea. The esophagus does not have the hyaline cartilage. It has the muscularis externa. And then adventitia connective tissue surrounds both of them. If we look at that kind of in more detail, here in this portion of this slide is the trachea. Down here is the esophagus. So here is the lumen of the trachea through which air flows. Here is the lumen of the esophagus through which food flows. Here we get our ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium with lamina propria basement membrane of the trachea. Here we have the stratified squamous epithelium with a little bit of lamina propria underneath of the esophagus. Here's our connective tissue in the submucosa of the trachea. Here is the connective tissue in the submucosa of the esophagus. Below the submucosa of the esophagus, we find the muscularis externa bilayer. Below the submucosa of the trachea, we find our hyaline cartilage in that C-shaped ring. So just to kind of review and sum up, the trachea is part of the respiratory system. We have ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium in the mucosa, with a little bit of lamina propria connective tissue underneath that. We have seromucus glands in the submucosa. We're creating lots of mucus, lots of phlegm that helps trap and dust particles and keep it out of the bronchi and the alveoli below the trachea. Then we have our C-shaped hyaline cartilage rings, and then our adventitia. If we look at the esophagus, you can see this is part of our digestive system. So we have stratified squamous epithelium in the mucosa, again with a little bit of lamina propria underneath. Then the submucosa without the serous mucus glands. No hyaline cartilage. We have the muscularis externa, which at this point is skeletal muscle in a circular layer and a longitudinal layer, and then adventitia around all of that. Then the other kind of things that you guys looked at was some lung pathologies, so kind of differentiating between what is healthy lung tissue and what is diseased lung tissue. And tuberculosis was one of the first that you guys looked at. So here again, our nice healthy lung, and here you can kind of see the lung that's from someone who's suffering tuberculosis. You can see all these kind of fibrous tubercles. It's not these nice, healthy, open spaces of the alveoli. You're starting to get a lot more fibrous tissue, and it just doesn't quite look quite as nice, and it doesn't look as healthy. If we look at emphysema, emphysema is kind of often caused by COPD and smoking, and the alveoli in someone suffering from emphysema get really, really, really large, and that's what we call a bulla. Again, here's our nice healthy lung tissue with the small alveoli. Now here we've got these huge, just overly large alveoli that we call a bulla. And so we don't have as many alveoli because the alveoli get huge and enlarged, but we still have the same amount of space in our lungs, and so we end up with less alveoli, less surface area for exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, so it makes it much harder to breathe. If we look at a lung cancer, lung carcinoma, here again, healthy lung tissue. Here is lung tissue from somebody suffering carcinoma. You can see it's not as neat looking. It's there's not those nice open spaces in the alveoli. There's a lot more fibrous tissue, a lot more epithelial tissue. And just is not nearly as conducive for gas exchange. And then if we were to look at a smoker's lung, again, here is our healthy lung tissue, and here is a smoker's lung with those lovely little black deposits of tar. So if that doesn't make you stop smoking, boy, I don't know what would, because that's just really not very pretty. So hopefully that helps clarify some of the respiratory histology.